Good morning, everybody. Now, you may think that all the bills that have gone through Parliament already in the last 6 months have been disastrous and have been an attack on our way of life, our culture, and our economy. But there's something else coming up which is as bad or even worse as everything that has gone before. And this is something called the Climate and Nature Bill. This was first introduced in a previous parliament by the Green MP, former Green MP now, Caroline Lucas. It was introduced again a second time just before the general election in 2024 by a Labour MP, but it fell because of the general election. But it was introduced again by a Lib Dem MP called Ros Savage on the 16th of October. So it's a private member's bill. And private members' bills don't normally progress very fast. They usually fall because they don't get much support. But this one has got a lot of support because there is an NGO called 0 Hour, which is lobbying MPs, lords, council leaders, councillors, other NGOs around the country to support this. So they claim that there are 190 people already who are politicians, either in the Commons or the Lords or in local councils, local council leaders who support this bill. And it is going forward to have its second reading in the House of Commons on Friday, the 24th of January. So that's just a few days' time from when I'm making the video. Now, one hope for this is that there aren't that many MPs around on Friday because a lot of them go to their constituencies and do their surgeries. So there might not be enough MPs in Parliament to vote for this to go forward after the second reading into committee stage and so on, and then into the third reading. But there may be, because a lot of the MPs now, we know there's a majority of Labour, Lib Dem, Greens. The Tories are just as bad because they all support the woke agenda and the climate agenda to varying degrees. And so there might be enough who will stay deliberately to vote for this bill to go through. Now, why this is so dangerous is it will destroy the economy, essentially, and it will give the government powers over your private property to say if they want, something is going to happen, something needs to happen to your house or your farm or a plot of land that you own because of the climate or because of nature, then the government can essentially take your property because everything that happens in the country will have to be beholden to the targets in this climate and nature bill. So let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. So let's just click here. I'm going to click this one. Okay. So here is the introduction to the bill. So it's a bill to require the United Kingdom to achieve climate and nature targets, to give the Secretary of State a duty to implement a strategy to achieve those targets, to establish a climate and nature assembly to advise the Secretary of State in creating that strategy, to give duties to the Committee on Climate Change and the Joint Nature Conservation Committee regarding the strategy and targets and for connected purposes. Now, there is such a thing as a Committee on Climate Change that was established in 2008 after the original Climate Change Act, which is bad enough because that requires the country to reduce carbon dioxide emissions to net zero by 2050. But this is actually going to give more power to this committee to tell the Secretary of State for Climate. There wasn't such a thing 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. Now there is. That person will have to put in a binding strategy and binding targets along the way to meet net zero by 2050 and interim targets in 2030. Now, let's look a little bit into the bill here. So this is the meat of it. And just look at section 2 here, or subsection 2 of section 1. So that's how bills go. The objectives are to ensure that the United Kingdom reduces its overall contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions to net zero at a rate consistent with limiting the global mean temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels as defined by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, so pre-industrial levels, that was like, back in 1750. So yes, the global temperatures have increased by about 0.7 degrees, 0.8 degrees since 1750. But that's because we're on the increase after the mini ice age, which was a decrease in temperature after the medieval warm period. So at the moment, we're just, the Earth's temperature is increasing in terms of global average because it's getting back to the norm of what it was in the medieval warm period. I mean, this is absolute nonsense. But, it shows that the people who've written this bill are eco-loons who think that we need to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, even though carbon dioxide emissions are completely natural. Now, the next thing it says we got to fulfill, the government of the UK has to fulfill its obligations and commitments under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, again, and so on. So, yeah, this is all to do with, again, meeting the Paris Agreement targets of cutting carbon dioxide and limiting global temperature increases as though that could happen. Next thing, this is down a little bit in the bill because it talks about that last bit was about climate, but this is also about nature. And what they're now starting to do, as well as declaring a climate emergency, there is no climate emergency, but the government and various local authorities and councils around the country have declared a climate emergency. They're also now starting to declare a nature emergency. So this is to do with loss of biodiversity. Ironically, probably because they're putting up all these solar panels and wind turbines everywhere, which are killing birds and killing habitats, and destroying habitats. But here it says, so the government, again, will have the obligation to halt and reverse its overall contribution to the degradation and loss of nature in the United Kingdom and overseas by increasing the health, abundance, diversity, and resilience of species, populations, habitats, and ecosystems, so that by 2030, and measured against a baseline of 2020, nature is visibly and measurably on the path of recovery. Well, stop building housing developments all over the countryside. Stop building wind farms and solar farms, then, for goodness sake, if you're concerned about nature. But they're going to do that because they say there's a climate emergency, and then they say there's also a nature emergency, and do the exact opposite of what needs to be done to alleviate the said hypothetical non-existent nature emergency. Well, there are problems in nature, of course. There is overfishing, there is destruction of habitat, and so on. And those are things that need to be met, but not like this, because they will probably, almost certainly do the exact opposite of what needs to be done to help nature. Now, this goes on, and it says to ensure. Oh, sorry, that's it. I think I've got sorry, I'm going to go to this one next. So that carries on from before. The government needs to meet the objectives and targets in something called the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Now, I've never heard of this before, and I took a look at it, and it is most bizarre. This is the first paragraph in the report from the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework. I'll just read the first sentence here. Biodiversity is fundamental to human well-being, a healthy planet, and economic prosperity for all people, including for living well in balance and in harmony with Mother Earth. This is some kind of bizarre neo-pagan document, but it's being taken seriously by politicians who are now talking up the idea of a nature emergency and then introducing legislation to force governments to meet this very bizarre framework that has been created here. Let's go on and look a little bit more at some things. This is a bit further on, and I've highlighted a little bit here. Again, the framework recognizes and considers these diverse value systems and concepts, including, for those countries that recognize them, the rights of nature and the rights of Mother Earth. So in the UK, an MP has introduced a bill that says that we have to obey a framework that recognizes the rights of Mother Earth. How on earth that's going to be proven in a court of law, I have no idea. But there are lots of crazy lawyers and barristers and judges around these days that will probably try to find a way to do this. But going down to actually what it says a little bit more. Now, here is something that we're more familiar with. The Agenda 2030. So it says, in point 8 here, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is a contribution to the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So again, this is very, very tied in to what you all know is very destructive to society and the economy, and it is basically a backhand way of introducing communism and taking away property rights that we've had for centuries and centuries under the guise of sustainability and a climate emergency and all this kind of nonsense. Next thing, there are 23 targets in this Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Here's a couple of them. Target 2, ensure that by 2030, at least 30% of areas of degraded terrestrial, inland water and marine and coastal ecosystems are under effective restoration in order to enhance biodiversity and ecosystem functions and services, ecological integrity and connectivity. So this is about rewilding, and it's about giving the government control over land, because they're saying that 30% of lands and water resources have to be given over to nature. Now, in a country like Congo and Brazil, there's way more than 30% is natural rainforest, and that should be preserved. Of course, I'm not saying it shouldn't. We need to look after those areas of the world and not destroy them. A lot of the destruction of what's going on in the rainforest is to mine cobalt for electric cars and vehicles, which is another thing where the green agenda is more destructive than not pursuing the green agenda and just sticking to what we have and what we know. But in a country like the United Kingdom, which is very, very densely populated, over 80% of the land is given over to agriculture. And so for them to say, well, we need to rewild, 10 or 20% of the land, that's going to be absolutely destructive to farming, farmers, and agriculture in this country. There's already an attack on farmers, which we've seen under the Starmer regime with inheritance tax and extra business taxes. Now this bill is coming in, and if it comes in, it's going to give this Committee on Climate Change the power to tell the Secretary of State for Climate to basically requisition land and rewild it and say, well, on this land here and this land here, you're not allowed to farm. Stop agriculture, because this bill says you must do that in order to meet your sustainability targets by 2030 and extra sustainability targets by 2050. So it's going to be completely destructive to the whole agricultural sector. And if you own a house, for example, this they might say in terms of climate and reducing carbon dioxide. Oh, you live in an old house which uses lots of energy, therefore we need to knock it down. This house can't exist anymore, or you can't heat it up. You're not allowed to use energy in this house. You've got to knock it down and build some horrible, homogeneous, inhuman carbuncle full of smart flats, which you can be remotely controlled. Your energy use can be remotely controlled and turned off if someone in the Climate Change Committee deems that you're using too much energy. But let's go back to the next one. This is the final one I've got to share here. Target 16 from this Kunming Montreal framework: ensure that people are encouraged and enabled to make sustainable consumption choices, including by establishing supportive policy, legislative or regulatory frameworks, improving education and access to relevant and accurate information and alternatives, and by 2030 reduce the global footprint of consumption in an equitable manner, including through halving global food waste, significantly reducing overconsumption, and substantially reducing waste generation in order for all people to live well in harmony with Mother Earth. Well, look, I mean, I'm all against waste, but this goes far beyond saying, well, we need to cut down our waste. It's also about talking about enforcing lower consumption through legislation and regulations. And we know what they want to do because they've already said it. The World Economic Forum has already told us they want people to not eat meat anymore. Or they say meat will be a rare treat. You'll have a little bit once a month. They want to get rid of cars so you don't have private cars. They want to limit how much you're allowed to travel in an aeroplane and go on foreign holidays. But of course, the elite will still be allowed to go on their private jets from Northolt, whereas normal people who fly out from Heathrow and Gatwick on commercial planes will be limited to one flight a year or 2 flights every 3 years or whatever they set, or maybe none at all. They want to get rid of cars so that we'll all do active travel, which means walking and cycling, which means no one will be able to go very far, which is why they're implementing 15-minute cities all over the place, where they're making it hard for you to even travel from one part of a city to another in your car so that you walk and cycle. But this means if you want to go anywhere long distance, you will have to take public transport, which might not be available. And they're even talking about limiting the amount of clothes you can buy. Now, look, with this, I know that some people are completely wasteful with their clothes, which is disgusting. You know, there are some people, they buy an outfit, they wear it once and then they throw it away, and they buy another outfit and they wear it once and they throw it away. You know, they get through about 200 dresses or shirts in a year. That's disgustingly wasteful. I mean, myself, I maybe buy 2 or 3 shirts a year, so I don't buy too much. But for them to actually say, they're going to put limits on what you can purchase. I mean, this is essentially communism. They're essentially taking away your individual liberty, your freedom. The free market will be gone. Your choice to spend your money and what you choose to spend it on will be gone, essentially. And just because there are a few people who are, absolutely disgustingly over wasteful, that's true, it doesn't mean that everybody should be penalized and restricted because of a few people. And actually, the people who are most wasteful are the people who are pushing this climate nonsense, because they go and fly off to their COP summits and their climate summits and their global summits and World Economic Summits, 4 or 5 times a year on their private jets. They're the most wasteful people in the world, but they want to bring in a piece of legislation that is going to hurt and harm us normal people in this country from doing what we have all been able to do for many, many years, which is to decide what we want to do with our own money and to be able to use the free market. So this bill here is really, really destructive to the economy, to our way of life, to everything that we've known. It's going to give the government power to essentially destroy private property, and it will destroy the economy because they want to completely decarbonize and get rid of all carbon-based energy, including imports of gas and LNG from overseas. So we basically won't have an economy apart from, maybe growing some potatoes and selling it to somebody, and that will be it. This is going to be the end of the United Kingdom if this comes in, very, very quickly. So we need to write to our MPs to say, go on Friday, the 24th of January, and vote against this thing. This is more important on this one day than going to your constituency, because, the people you help in your constituency are going to be decimated. There's not going to be any help for them if the economy is crushed by this thing. Go to the House of Commons next Friday, vote against this thing, vote it down, and make sure it doesn't progress and get to its third reading. This needs to fall on the 25th of January. And the people who are supporting this, whether they're MPs or Lords or council leaders, ultimately need to get voted out. So, I'll make my normal appeal. Please do not support Labour, Tory, Lib Dem, Green. They're all the same. Come and join us in the Heritage Party, because we're standing up against this nonsense, and we will truly look after our countryside in a way that is wholesome and protects our heritage, rather than this fake preservation, which is going to actually destroy the economy and destroy all of our farmland as well. Thanks for listening. Vote against and activate yourselves against this climate and nature bill. Thanks for listening, everyone, and God bless you all.